a time. Hello, good evening. Can I grab everybody's attention? Welcome. For those of you who are here in person, we are aware it is warm. It is noted, and a call has been made, so bear with us. So thank you. To begin this evening, I would very much like to invite John Bloch, who is a traditional musician and singer from the Seneca Nation, to begin the evening. John, come on down. Thank you very much, John. Thanks for honoring us with that.
resides on land that includes the ancestral territories of many indigenous peoples, including the Shawnee, Lenape, Delaware, Haudenosaunee, Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Mohawk, Tuscarora, and Cherokee. By acknowledging this, we recognize and appreciate these indigenous nations whose territories we are living and working on. Indigenous peoples have been of the land currently known as West Virginia since time immemorial. It is important to understand the context that has brought our university community to reside here on this land and of our place within this long history. By acknowledging this, we endeavor to always seek the truth about who we have been, who we are now, and who we can become.
Welcome and good evening to everyone here and everybody out in the virtual sphere. We're live streaming on YouTube, so hopefully everybody out there is having as wonderful experience as we are. My name is Todd Tabutis, and I am director of the Art Museum of West Virginia University, and it is my distinct honor to introduce tonight's speaker. Marie Watt is an American artist. She's a member of the Seneca Nation of Indians and also has German-Scot ancestry. Her interdisciplinary work draws from history, biography, Iroquois protofeminism, and Indigenous teachings. In it, she explores the intersection of history, community, and storytelling. Through collaborative actions, she instigates multigenerational and cross-disciplinary conversations that might create a lens and conversation for understanding connectedness to place, one another, and the universe. Watt holds an MFA in painting and printmaking from Yale University. She also has degrees from Willamette University and the Institute of American Indian Arts, and in 2016, she was awarded an honorary doctorate from Willamette University. She's attended residencies at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture and the Vermont Studio Center, and has received fellowships from Anonymous Was a Woman, the Joan Mitchell Foundation, the Harpo Foundation, the Ford Family Foundation, and the Native Arts and Culture Foundation, among others. As you find yourself visiting art museums in other cities, as I know you like to do, I encourage you to find those institutions where Watt's work is collected. The Metropolitan Museum of Art and Whitney Museum of American Art in New York City, Denver Art Museum, Portland Art Museum, Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas, and the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of the American Indian and Renwick Gallery, among others. The reason for inviting our guest to share her story is because her work is the subject of a mid-career retrospective currently on view at the Art Museum of West Virginia University through December 12th. Storywork, The Prince of Marie Watt, from the collections of Jordan D. Schnitzer and his Family Foundation. Focusing on her decades-long engagement with printmaking, the exhibition features more than 50 original prints and several sculptural works from Watt's days as a grad student at Yale to the most recent piece created during the pandemic. Marie has traveled from her home in Portland, Oregon to Morgantown, along with her studio project manager, Stephanie Sun, to spend several days this week with students, faculty, and members of the community making art together. Earlier today, she was the honored guest at WVU's 30th annual Peace Tree ceremony held on the downtown campus. It is important to acknowledge those individuals who have collaborated to make this week's events possible. Bonnie Brown, coordinator of WVU's Native American Studies program, has been an enthusiastic and generous partner, as have Joe Lupo, Megan Light, and Christina Olson in the School of Art and Design, and Rose Casey in the Department of English. And the entire staff of the Art Museum also have my heartfelt thanks in taking on the months of planning and installation, work that is often invisible to everyone on the outside, to make sure the galleries are beautifully installed and events and programs are engaging to audiences of all ages. I also want to thank Judith Gold Stitzel for her support of public events like this one through the Judith Gold Stitzel Museum Education Fund, as well as Linda and the late Art Jacknowitz for ongoing outreach support through the Abby Jacknowitz School Travel Fund, which pays for school buses for students in K through 12 classes to come from around the region to visit the Art Museum. And we're most grateful to the collector, Jordan Schnitzer, and the staff of his foundation, who so generously made it possible to bring Marie Watt's remarkable exhibition to WVU. Now, you really don't want to hear from me, so with that, I'd like you to join me in welcoming Marie Watt.
Whoa, whoa. Sorry. Wow.
Was that part of it?
And now, okay. Okay, hold on here. And I don't think, sorry, how do I start the play? Bottom right, the enter? Sorry, so
No, you're right.
okay. I'm accustomed to a slightly different format. Thank you for your patience. It's funny, I never got that great at Zoom, and now, after 2 years, this is my first public lecture, and so please excuse me if I'm a little rusty. All right. I also just wanted to give a few acknowledgments. I want to express my gratitude to the entire museum here at WVU. In particular, Todd, I'm just going to say first names, Todd, Heather, Bob, Michael, Madeline, Jason, Liza, Andrea, and I think that's everyone. And I also wanted to acknowledge Joe Lupo, whose students I worked with Stephanie. Together we worked with students in 2 printmaking classes all day Tuesday, and it was a lot of fun. I also want to share that it is such a treat to be here in the company of John Bloch. He is a wisdom keeper and a language bearer, and my grandparents were both, their first language was Seneca, and yet it wasn't taught to my mom and her 6 siblings. And so John is tirelessly working and teaching and advocating in our community, bringing a future generations of language speakers. And I think it's really important to understand that really federal policies are what kind of originally created the divide between people, the continual learning of our languages. And so it's really such a treat to have John here, and thank you, Bonnie, for bringing him. So my husband likes to refer to this image as 3 generations of Seneca teeth. And, and it's my mother, grandmother, and I on the Washington State side of the Columbia River, and we were going to see the petroglyph, She Who Watches. I really like to acknowledge my family in my practice. I consider my parents my roadies. And at 83 and or 82 and 83 respectively, they don't get to travel with me quite so often, but here they are helping at an installation at the Aldrich Museum of Contemporary Art. I wanted to share a little bit about my background. I am Seneca. I'm from the Turtle Clan. Traditionally, we have 4 clans that are birds and 4 clans that are animals, or like I like to say, the 4-leggeds. And we would marry, animal would marry a bird in order to create balance. My husband is non-native, but his moniker is the crow. And so I think that there is balance in my house as a result of this union. And also I want to acknowledge that I am able to be here because of his supportive, because of his support and efforts. So one thing I think it's important for you all to know about me is I come from a matrilineal society, and some people might not remember this or know this, but the suffragists, such as Susan B. Anthony, here with woodland influences, the suffragists actually lived in Seneca Falls, New York, specifically Matilda Jocelyn Gage and Katie Stanton, Katie Stanton, that is correct. And they lived in proximity to Seneca and Haudenosaunee women and learned a lot about our rights and responsibilities. Historically, we are the landowners in our community. That is, the clan mothers in our communities nominate our chiefs, and now some of our communities have more of a Western kind of election-style democracy system. Our clans are passed on through our mothers, and I feel like there's one more thing, but it will come to me later. And in this particular depiction of Susan B. Anthony, I sort of like that she looks a little bit like George Washington. In 2003, I started thinking about blankets in my life and how in our community we give blankets to honor people who are witness to important life events. And it took me originally to thrift stores where I would buy blankets, anything under $5. And I thought of it kind of like a tube of paint. And in 2003, it's also probably important to note that it was the advent of polar fleece, and truthfully, there was just all these blankets, these beautiful old wool blankets in thrift stores. And I knew I wanted to create something that was columnar and totem-like, something that mimicked linen closets and maybe acknowledged Brancusi's endless column. And I also was interested in how this ladder would connect sky and ground. One of the things I learned quickly as I was working with blankets is that people would come up to me and share, oh, I used to have a blanket like that, or this blanket reminds me of my grandmother. So I also was really attracted to the binding on blankets. And for me, bindings are sort of ledger-like, and they record not just the physical remembrance of our sleep, but even the metaphysical remembrances of our dreams. So, prompted by this understanding that people had blanket stories, my installation started to include a blank book where blanket stories had been entered. And one of the things that was kind of amazing to me and very moving was that inside the books, people would share blanket stories, and they were incredibly intimate and personal. And so I decided to, or the response to that was for me to invite people to actually contribute a blanket with a blanket story to build a larger sculpture. And this was one of the very first projects that I realized in which every single blanket in the sculpture was contributed by an individual. And each blanket included a story. So I want to share a couple stories with you. This one says, I remember the first time my grandfather told me that the blankets came from sheep. And every time we went for a drive in the country, I would look for white and green striped sheep. So do people donate special kind of family blankets? Occasionally, yes. Here is another one from John Moses. This quilt was made by my grandmother, Edith Anderson Montour of the Six Nations Reserve, the first Native registered nurse in Canada and the first World War veteran of the U.S. Army Nursing Corps. The quilt includes patches of her own Army blanket and nurse's uniform. The quilt was used by 4 generations of the Montour Moses families at Six Nations and is all about warmth and security and helping others. We have another one to keep forever as a family heirloom. So that was one of the earliest collaborative blanket story columns that I created with community. And this is one of the most recent. And this piece was created over the course, or in response to the pandemic, and really in anticipation of this exhibition. So one of the things, and the title actually reflects it. So this piece is titled Blanket Stories, Great Grandmother, Pandemic, and Daybreak. And there were 3 pandemic stories that really stood out. And one was about a woman who there was a baby that would be arriving in the family, and she taught herself to knit because she wanted to make a blanket for her sister's child. And so she made, I think, 2 or 3 blankets before she kind of got the hang of knitting again. And she also really reflected on how that blanket and that knitted matter gave her comfort during that moment. Another woman donated a blanket that was made of fleece ties, and it was a Star Wars themed blanket. And she set about using her time during the pandemic to make blankets to contribute to people who were unhoused during the pandemic. And I think one of the things that was really important, or that is really important in this story, is just understanding how many children were impacted as well. And then the last pandemic-related blanket came from a woman who had been making protective masks, and her blanket was created from the scrap material. This is a more recent sculpture, and I have been reflecting on how blankets are also objects that not just accompany us, or they not only receive children and receive new lives, right? But they also accompany us on our departures. So this piece is called Blanket Stories Ghost Writer. A little bit about my use of I-beams. In our community, our iron workers are considered skywalkers. And on a side note, I am of the generation who saw Star Wars in its first run in a movie theater. And I really have always enjoyed how how words have double meaning. So for me, it was exciting to know that Skywalkers didn't only refer to our iron workers, but it also had a connection to Luke and his hero's journey. One of the things that I'm interested in with the I-beams is when I moved to New York between 2009 and 13, I lived in Brooklyn, and it was right next to Borum Hill, where there was a small community of Iroquois ironworkers who lived there while working on Manhattan's bridges and skyscrapers. And I felt in moving from the Pacific Northwest, I was trading in the conifers and totems of that region for the scaffolding and skyscrapers of New York City. On this piece, I've also started to explore writing on these I-beams, and in this particular piece, Skywalker, Skyscraper Twins, you'll see the words flint and sapling, and it refers to the twin heroes that are part of our creation story. In the studio, we like to use the hashtag dogs for scale. So I would say about 4 or 5 years ago, I started to ask this question: what would the world look like if we considered ourselves companion species? And for me, this question came out of the understanding of our relationship to animals through the Seneca and Haudenosaunee creation story. And because of the way animals helped Sky Woman, we consider animals our first teachers, and animals are also acknowledged through our clans. And so I started to think, well, what's the entry point for people who might not have that that understanding, and I started to think about our pets. And I decided I would really focus on dogs and canines. And so I started doing research and was led to this image of the Capeltine wolf. And one of the things that interested me about this image is that the she-wolf is emaciated, and the twins are looking rather plump, and her face looks exhausted, but I also sense that she could become ferocious at a moment's notice, and her body is a canopy. And so I started thinking about this image and our relationship to animals, and also about how her chest is her this vulnerable area, but that she also is exposing herself and generously sharing it with the twins. And I guess one thing I wanted to say about this print right here is that sometimes my print work informs my object-based practice, and sometimes the objects inform the prints. And so this particular print started as a soft ground print, and it started with the cloth. Prior to it being embroidered, it was run through a printing press on soft ground, and it made the matrix or template for the print that you saw on this previous screen. And then this particular piece I continued to embroider on. And so in many ways, the print preceded this small sampler, but within my practice, it has me kind of thinking a lot about what is an artifact, and is the artifact the plate? Is it the print? Is it this piece? So the other thing that I've been thinking about as I was looking at dogs is I saw this image of Asher Wertheimer by John Singer Sargent. And one of the things that I love about this image is that in the composition, it kind of reminds me actually of a Vermeer in the way the lights in this portrait kind of lead your eye around the space. And you almost don't see it, but in that bottom right corner, you notice this dog with this tongue. And I started to think about how the tongue that this dog shares and that I share and that Asher shares is an example of our relatedness. I started to think a lot about how tongues also are petal-like in regards to how they nurture and feed our body. And the other thing I think that's important to know about tongues is that for those of us who have tongues and the ability to speak, it is important that we speak up for those who cannot speak up for themselves. I think sometimes people add a sense of scale, and this is my youngest studio assistant, Evelyn. So I started working sculpturally with this canine form in 2017, and it began with a collaboration with the Corning Museum of Glass. And I was talking about what was possible to make, and my the lead gaffer at the time said, "I can translate your drawing." And so this piece was realized. It's crystal, and it was created at the Corning Museum of Glass. And I, in my nervousness, am forgetting the name of my lead gaffer, but I want you to know that he is a really important collaborator. And, sorry. And so I think, like, for me, one of the things that happened in that moment in collaborating with somebody and seeing something that I'd always, like, sort of wanted to realize in, like, a large scale, three-dimensionally, it sort of gave me permission to dive in and do it. So this was created in my studio with the help of a small team. And it was actually created for an exhibition at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum at Washington State University. And it had to get through 60-inch doorway. And I knew I wanted pieces that could be carried by ideally two people. So each component part probably weighs under 100 pounds. And I feel like one of the gifts about collaborating and getting outside of one's own head is the opportunity to, I don't know, think differently about what is possible. And so in many ways, working at the Corning Museum of Glass led to the creation of this piece, Companion Species, Underbelly. Around this time of thinking about the Capeltine wolf, I started thinking about the word mother. And one of the things that's so interesting to me about the she-wolf is that she wasn't a biological mother. And it made me think about what are the attributes of a mother. And around the time I was thinking about this word mother, I started listening to the song What's Going On, sung by Marvin Gaye, with different ears. I like to say in 1970, I probably heard this song in a breezy station wagon, and just 4 or 5 years ago, it sounded, or it meant something different to me. So I think one of the things that I learned is that the song was originally penned by Obie Benson from the Four Tops, and he was actually going by this protest. I'm going to go forward one. He was on a bus going past this protest in Berkeley Park, and it was a civil rights, it was a Vietnam War protest. And so when he was in the bus, he asked himself this question, what's going on? And he penned out the lyrics, and then Marvin Gaye added to them. And so I started thinking about what else was happening in this moment. And I think it's important to know that it was also the time when the American Indian movement was occupying Alcatraz. We also have the civil rights movement and the assassination of Martin Luther King. Flash forward, we have the climate change crisis. We have the Standing Rock Dakota pipeline access protests. We have the Flint water crisis and the murder of George Floyd. And so I see that there's like these things that are happening in history that are similar. So I started really, again, listening to this song even more. And one of the things that struck me about this call, mother, mother, brother, brother, sister, sister, father, father, is that I saw a relationship between Marvin Gaye's call for family to witness what's going on, and also I saw how it intersected with Indigenous knowledge about understanding familial relationships, and also a call to pay attention to what's going on. And I like to refer to this as an intersection between Marvin Gaye language and Indigenous knowledge about our relatedness. And this was a commission for a land acknowledgement for the University of Oregon. Whoop. This piece entitled We Are Here Now, I was thinking about how these look sort of like speech bubbles, and also how it creates an X, and an X is a marker. We also use X as a sign of endearment. My daughter taught me, and for all of those of you who've used X and O to sign letters, I don't think I completely understood that X is the hug and O is a kiss. But X is also the way Indigenous people signed our treaties. Proto, for me, relates to really reflecting on things that have come before me, but it also relates to this word protofeminism that is an acknowledgement of the Seneca and Haudenosaunee women and the way they lead in our community. And I have to share that when I went to college, I don't think I completely understood what feminism was, because I was raised with women who had always led and always had strong opinions, and who I want to say almost like gave the marching orders in our families, and they were respected for it, and they remain respected for it. So another aspect of my practice is open to the community sewing circles. And this is an image from a sewing circle that happened actually this past year when things sort of lifted a little bit in the course of the pandemic. And it was the first public program that happened at the Whitney in this moment where we're still sort of in flux, right? I like to say at the sewing circles, no sewing experience is necessary. You can come and go when you want. I like to feed you, although oftentimes in institutions and museums in particular, sometimes what is available are some mints. One of the things that I enjoy about the sewing circles is I think that when your head is down and you're working with something as familiar as cloth, stories flow. And it's important to me that these events are open to all ages and that cross-disciplinary knowledge is shared and also kind of cross-cultural experiences. And I think of this as like an Indigenous model for teaching and learning, but I think if you go back far enough in any of our communities, this is how we used to gather and learn from one another. The project that I worked on with the Whitney Museum's education department started with this poem by Joy Harjo called Singing Everything. And I invited people in the community to read the poem and then answer the prompt. What do you want to sing a song for in this moment? And at the very end of this presentation, I have some images, but Heather Harris in the education department had a bunch of 60 high school art students here on Tuesday, and they made linoleum blocks with their own words about something that they wanted to sing a song for in this moment. And this is an example of what happens sometimes when the sewing circle pieces are completed, they're finished in my studio. They sometimes gestate for a while, they go to different communities, they come back together, and then might become a piece like this, Companion Species, Remembering Song. And I would say, like, one thing that I think is important to understand with the sewing circles is I don't think of the sewing circles as a means to an end, so it's not really a means to making an object. I like to say with the sewing circles, I set a table, and what's created is created by everybody who gathers around that table. My mom, who worked in Indian education for 27 years, she likes to say that a circle expands and contracts, but a circle includes everybody, and everybody's voice is equal in a circle. In 2013, I was a artist in resident at the Denver Art Museum. And while there, I had a sewing circle kind of set up in this artist residency space, and people flowed in and out and would stitch and then leave, and more people might come in. And I met a couple of young women who were powwow dancers. And one was a fancy shawl dancer, and the other was a jingle dress dancer. And they both shared more about their powwow dances. And I had known when I was at the museum that I was going to be coming back to install a project. And I decided after hearing those stories that I would make a piece that was really specific or reflective on this information that I had learned about the jingle dress dance and the fancy shawl dance. And I had really hoped that I would see these young women again. And sadly, I did not. But the tent was set up right next to the powwow. And so you could hear the dancers and you could hear the jingles while we stitched in this open to the community sewing circle. Now, one of the things that I learned in working with jingles is that the pieces could no longer be against the wall. They needed to move away from the wall. So there was this sense that the jingles could sort of make their music, this healing sound. And so it's the beginning of most of my work coming away from the wall. This piece is called Companion Species Floating and Held. And just one second. It too is actually in response to the poem by Joy Harjo, Singing Everything. One of the things that she talks about is how we used to sing songs for sunrises. And I've been thinking a lot about sunrises and how someplace right now in the planet, a sunrise is happening. And someplace also there's a sunset. I'm interested in how, sunrises mark new beginnings or a new day. I also think it's interesting that we humans sometimes spend time trying to capture sunrises with cameras when I think the magic of a sunrise is really the fact that it envelopes us and that it's something that is in movement and it's fluttering and kind of glittering, and it's about the sounds that we hear, and it's about the temperature and the feeling in the air, and it's about being witness to this sort of this. I'm trying to think of a word. Sorry, I'm struggling to think of a word that doesn't belittle what it is, because I think that miracles, I think that doesn't really kind of capture it. So I invite you to think about a sunrise that you remember and describe it for me in your mind. So one thing I should say about this piece too is that I've been thinking a lot about this twinning of language, and how in the Marvin Gaye song that it is this related to this history of call and response, and how it is related to trying to hurl a word further in space because the message is urgent. And I've also been thinking about how this twinning of language is a way of calling back to our ancestors and forward to future generations. And so for me, these two sort of jingle forms also connect to that concept. So I realized that I wanted to figure out how to make these, situate, sculpt, create an environment in which these jingles could dance. So I'm not a powwow dancer, But I think like if my artwork could somehow relate to powwow dancing, I would be most honored, because in a powwow dance, there's the sound of a drum, which relates to a heartbeat, and there's the smells in the arena, and there's the community and the talk and the I'll say chatter, and there's the music, and there's the food, and there's the regalia, and then and one of the things that's important to know about jingles is that the jingle dress dance actually came about during a pandemic, but this pandemic was the influenza. And there's different versions of the story, so I apologize if you know a different one, and I invite people to give me feedback so I understand the story correctly. But my understanding is that there was an elder and medicine person in the community who had a granddaughter who was sick with the flu. And there was this concern that they would lose her. And so the elder had a vision about how they might be able to heal this child who was gravely ill. And in this dream and vision, there was instructions to make this dress using tin jingles. The tins that make the bells that I'm referring to as jingles, historically, they might have been like a tobacco can lid or like a tin lid that then would be folded into this bell shape. And so the instructions were that this dress would be danced on repeated occasions, and eventually, hopefully, the sick person, the child, would heal. And so it happened that the child did heal, and because of this medicine that was created through both the dance but also the sound of the jingles, the dance was shared with other Indigenous communities, and it has since been included as a powwow dance. And so I think the volume is off, but so I have to say, this is my, it's the first step to activating them. So I'm still trying to figure out how to activate them, but it took a while to get to this moment. And so in this installation at Stello, Arts Foundation in Portland, Oregon, in this installation, people are invited to touch them, which is actually really great, because normally in institutions, people can't just go up and touch the artwork. And so that in itself is the first step. So the other story that I wanted to share about these jingles relates to this woman, Vi Hilbert. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and my mom had worked in Indian education, and she had created a storytelling circle in which originally it was focused on the youth in schools, but quickly younger siblings would attend and elders would attend, and it very quickly became this multi-generational story circle. And we would learn our stories, and we also learned stories from people in the community. This is the urban Indian community. And so Vi Hilbert is a Coast Salish woman who actually was responsible for bringing back the Lecceed language. And she used to tell this story about darkness coming in to the community, and clouds were lowering. And everyone spoke different languages. And so as these clouds continued to bear down and create darkness, people were starting to get frustrated and disagree, because they actually didn't have a common language to use to kind of like figure out a solution. And so in the version of the story that I'm sort of drawn to, it is the wisdom of a child who brings people together and says, if we all say this word, which is how, then, and we all use these sticks from the forest, and we all work together, then maybe, just maybe, we can lift the sky. And so they say, yay how? Yay how? Yay how? And the sky begins to lift, and light comes again. And I think it's an important story about how we're all connected and related. And so, so in that, I feel like in that moment of like kind of like installing this sculpture, it was a way of remembering this story. But I'm also really thinking about how in future iterations and explorations of this installation, the sticks and that word might become part of how the piece is experienced. Yep. All right. So this piece is called Companion Species Catenary, and I was thinking some of Jasper Johns, who also has explored this word and this form in his paintings. A catenary is this like line that creates this arc that's often used in building bridges. And for me, this beadwork really kind of, this beadwork and these words actually relate to this calling back and calling forward to our ancestors, which also are a bridge. So one of the things that I wanted to share about these beads is that they're Italian beads that were recently brought back to market, but they came from a consortium of bead workers and bead makers in Italy that disbanded in the 1920s. And one of the things that's so interesting to me about beads is that I feel that Indigenous bead workers haven't been properly recognized for the kind of this expressive art form. And I think it's so interesting that bead workers, or excuse me, when people think of Native American beadwork, it's oftentimes considered traditional, but beadwork is probably just as traditional as like a Paul Klee drawing or another kind of modernist piece. And so one of the things that I've been experimenting with is scale in relationship to beadwork. And these particular beads, one of the things that spoke to me about using them is just how it reminds me of beads that I've seen in Iroquois and Haudenosaunee whimsies and beadwork that are part of our community. And so I feel like in using these beads, I'm using beads that may have also been used by my ancestors. That's okay. What's happening?
There was something weird on the screen. Sorry.
Okay. All right. This piece is called Companion Species Constellation, and these star-like forms are drawn from a basket that is of California or Oregon indigenous origin. And one of the things that I love about the original basket is that this form was considered to be kind of a constellation. And I think for me, it's a reminder that these stars and the cosmos are both kind of this ancient and modern space that we share. And this piece also was created thinking about 1970s video games, such as Atari. Well, thinking about Atari and Pac-Man in particular. And I think one thing that's so interesting about Pac-Man is that it was created like thinking of having women in mind, because there was a lot of first-person like shooter games, and so it was created with this idea of creating a game that would also draw women to computer or digital gaming. It actually also, the stars create the constellation Pleiades, and those are some of the references. We also started in my studio. I actually have a wonderful team of studio assistants, and we started thinking about early computer languages and Ada Lovelace and the Jacquard weaving machines, amongst other things. And at this point, since I just talked about my studio assistants, I affectionately refer to them as the Brain Trust, and I just want to acknowledge their contributions as well. This one's. All right, so I just have a couple more images to share. Let's see, how are we doing? All right, I was going to be photographed for some article, I can't remember what it was, and I decided that I wanted to test this idea that I've been wanting to do for a while. And so this is an image of me in front of a sign that is on a painting kind of drop cloth, and it's been rendered with gaffer tape. And it is really the beginning of me thinking about working in neon. And I took a t-shirt and mimicked where the letter, let's see, I and S would be, and folded myself into the word Turtle Island. And I think in that moment, and I didn't anticipate this, but I realized in that moment, I placed myself back into a place, like a real place. Like, I know it looks like a sign, but for me, it was knitting myself back with this place that I come from, which is Turtle Island. And it's where we walk. And one of the things that I'm really interested in doing in the near future is creating a Turtle Island neon sign and putting it out in the world and inviting people to say the word Turtle Island. And if you don't know what Turtle Island means, it's okay, but I also feel like I'm being a little subversive because we're oftentimes asked to learn things or to interpret things, and in this particular case, I've decided really to try not to do that. And I'm interested in how the word Turtle Island has, it's sort of a poetic term, so if you don't know what it means, what does it conjure in your imagination? And I'm also very interested in putting a viewer in the position of taking time to learn what Turtle Island means and to understand it as it relates not to just Haudenosaunee people, but also to other woodlands communities. And in our community, Turtle Island is North America, but what does it mean to say Turtle Island, and how might that change the way we steward a place and our relationships with one another, is the question that this future project asks. One of the things that I love about this painting by T.C. Cannon, Self-Portrait in the Studio, is that the landscape behind him is really bigger than his figure, right? And so I started really thinking about how, in this particular, what is a self-portrait? And in this particular case, I think Cannon, with this shirt that has kind of these, I almost think of them as cactus flowers, but how it brings the outside in and the inside out. And I can't help but believe that the landscape behind Cannon is as much like an important part of the portrait as like his figure. And I think it's important to remember that this landscape is the site of, it's a site of beauty, but it's also the site of historical trauma. It is the site of ceremony. It is the site of labor. It is the site of extraction. And it's a resilient site, but it is also a site that requires our attention and action and respect. And so the piece on the right is called Companion Species Self-Portrait in Studio. And now you know a little bit more about its origins. So I'm going to end by just saying that I think that sunrises, I think sunrises are bigger than the experience on the horizon line. They're the experiences that connect us and that transfer through us. And this was the group of high school students that came and worked in collaboration with Heather Harris on Tuesday. And I loved what they created and also how kind of horizon-like those colorful cards with words were. And then this is one of Joe Lupo's printmaking students, or I should say a few of Joe Lupo's printmaking students at work in the studio. And here are some of the prints that were created during that collaboration. I'd like to just end by again thanking WVU and the Art Museum for bringing me here, and also with the words of Gordon Bettles, who likes to say, "My story changes when I know your story." And I hope that maybe some people will join us tomorrow for the Open to the Community Sewing Circles. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Marie. And so we just have a brief little moment for Q&A, and I wanted to say we are existing in this hybrid world. So I'm holding my iPad because for those of you on YouTube, if you have a question for Marie, and we'll only take a few to be respectful of everyone's time. And there's a little bit of delay on YouTube, so if you think of something, but I can also help to repeat questions from the audience into the microphone here, if you all have anything that you'd like to ask Marie. Yes.
I think it was the piece COVID with the blankets.
Yes.
And you had cedar on the base.
Yes.
And then you talked after it how the base and the structure that was supporting the blankets, how it related to the skywalkers. Was the cedar like cedar chest cedar, or was it more cedar, one of the herbs to help protect and, you know?
Yes.
Was it the indigenous version, or was it the?
So there's two different sort of blanket story columns that I've worked on, and some are the Skyscraper Skywalker series that have the I-beams in them, and there wasn't cedar in that piece. But the piece that you're referring to with cedar on it, I use materials that are conceptually important to me and storied, and so for me using cedar is a way of acknowledging where I live, which cedar is actually an important material, and not just important, a sacred material to Indigenous people of the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest. I'm interested in how cedar keeps pests away from wool blankets. Cedar is used for hope chests. So all of those associations are part of the reason why I'm drawn to using that material. And for me, I I don't know if I went into this at all, but like I'm really interested in the relationship between the columns. The columnar form for me is this relationship between sky and ground. And in our creation story, Sky Woman falls from this hole in the sky, and she's helped settle on what we now refer to as Turtle Island. And it's the animals that really help Sky Woman set up her new life in this place. And because of that historic relationship, then we acknowledge, we think of animals as being our relatives. And our clans acknowledge that relationship that we have with animals.
Wonderful.
I don't know if that completely answered everything, but yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, yes. And I'll repeat it into the microphone for
Thank
everyone.
you. Was really struck by the companion series, and I was thinking about how, for many of us who are not artists, being in the presence of a piece of art is almost like a companionship. And so when I think about that, I wonder what you, as an artist, envision us as viewers to take from that companionship. There seems to be that relationship quite a bit in a lot of your pieces.
So the question was about the nature and interaction with the viewer as a companion of the artwork, and how Marie conceives the person who is viewing the art and how they might become a companion to her work of art.
I don't know if I have an answer for that question, but I love that it is possible to form such a tight connection with a visual expression or some other expression, right? It could be music, it could be theater, it could be performance, it could be hiking, but to like have that bond and feel like it is something that wakes us up and kind of makes us think, and something that we like to return to because of that relationship. I think that when I reflect on what a companion species relationship might be, it would be that. I mean, I don't think I did it here, but earlier today during the peace tree ceremony, I did this call that was, mother, mother, brother, brother, sister, sister, auntie, auntie, grandmother, grandmother, grandfather, grandfather, mountain, mountain, deer, deer, black bear, paw, 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 paw. Like I was starting to think about the beautiful things that are here, right? I was thinking about the humid air, but those are also, like I hope that as we think about our relatedness, that we remember that we're all part of this kind of fragile and resilient ecosystem, right? And I think that a connection like what you're speaking of is really important.
So we probably have time for just one more question. Yes.
I was really struck by when you said that blankets sort of receive us into the world and they sort of see us on the way out too.
Mm-hmm.
And I was struck by how I never think about this whole middle bit as well, where sleeping and vulnerable, and blankets are the things that we sort of bring closest to us in our most vulnerable states.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave me this sort of new appreciation for this everyday object, and I just was wondering about your sort of thoughts on sort of elevating this sort of soft thing to this sort of firm and secure and safety thing, sort of feeling like Linus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really challenging to be a translator for these beautiful questions because I really want the people who are joining us virtually to be able to hear them. So the question was, or the comment was really about Marie speaking about blankets receiving us and blankets taking us when we depart, and the comment was about everything in between, and there's kind of vulnerable moments where we are covered with blankets every night and are sleeping and things, and asking, I think, Marie, to talk a little bit about that in-betweenness, that in-between moment. Did I capture it all right? Okay, thank you.
I think that I will share that I never anticipated working with blankets when I first, like, continuing to work with them. Like, I think the first time I was preparing for a show at the National Museum of the American Indian, George Gustav High location. And I don't think that I knew that almost 20 years later I would still be working with blankets, but I think what has drawn me to them is the fact that history that you just referred to, that we're constantly imprinting upon them, and that the mended spots and the stained bits and the worn bindings, that it all tells something about our story with that object. And they're very humble objects. So one of the things you'll see in the exhibition is a piece that's bronze, where the blankets are, converted to bronze. And what is that transformation, and how does it change the story that we tell about monuments, right? I mean, historically, I think monuments are the best, busts of famous men, a few women, people on equestrian statues. And what does it mean, though, to take something that's so elemental in our daily experience and to acknowledge its weight, both metaphysical and real, real weight. So I appreciate that you've acknowledged that. And I also think it's one of the reasons why people, when I do a collaborative project, especially maybe creating a sculpture with community, I think it's kind of amazing that people will share an actual blanket. People know typically, because of the language that goes out, that they could include a placeholder, or I could select a blanket. But I think sometimes there's this, people realize how special that story is, and they want the marker of that story to be to be presented. And I think that that's also really tells us something about our stories, but also how we do actually, I think, on a certain level as humans, want to find connection with others, even through our objects, even through these intimate objects that we take for granted.
So we'll conclude, and actually the last comment from the YouTube was actually just a comment and an appreciation, and I'll conclude with that, and a thanks for Marie. I love the sunrise piece. It makes me feel like it's a symbol of hope for a new day. So I think that that's a beautiful way to conclude, with genuine thanks for Marie for her generosity of spirit, for the gift of her art, and for the gift of community that she's bringing to us. Please do join us in the Museum Education Center tomorrow from 10 to 12:30 or 3:30 to 6. We'll have 2 different sewing circles. As Marie said, no experience necessary. Come and go as you like within those time frames. So we hope to see you there, and thank you again to Marie.